Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Jamin Heppell. Jamin's a really interesting guy, and I've been looking forward to this interview for a very long time. Jamin has an interesting background where he's helped people from all kinds of walks of life with their leadership development. Everything from young adults that are looking to find their leadership, their courage, their development, through to sports people and what it means for leadership development in the sports world. But what he does now, which has really captured my attention, is he's the founding director of mountains and marathons. And I won't spoil too much of the story to talk about what that's about, but what he has now is his clients join him on journeys which can be 6 months plus, where they work with him in a progression towards a adventurous activity that is the culmination of their journey with Jamin. I'm really interested to know how he stumbled into that and what happens for his clients when they go through these transformative, literally, journeys with him. So, Jamin, without any further ado, please do say hello to our audience and give us a flavour of that really rich background and what led you to be with us today.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mick. Thanks for that beautiful introduction, mate. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, to sort of bring a bit of context to what has me leading mountains and marathons and specifically facilitating transformational journeys for people in this way. As you may have gathered from Australia, so I grew up in country Victoria, southeast of Melbourne. And as a young man growing up, eldest of 3 boys and a very competitive household, I always gravitated towards leadership and sport. These are my 2 big passions growing up as a kid. And so if you look at my CV as a high school student, it was house captain, football captain, debate team captain, public speaking captain, and eventually school captain. And so leadership has always been something I've always gravitated towards, even if I didn't necessarily have a full understanding of what it was when I was a young man. I've always just gravitated towards these kinds of responsibilities. And I was really fortunate when I was 17 and the school captain at Leongatha Secondary College, I got invited onto a transformational leadership development retreat that was facilitated over 6 days by 12 passionate volunteers that brought together 60 young leaders from across the state to be inside a journey of personal inquiry, leadership development, and really looking at, it was like personal development 101. And in that was like strengths and weaknesses. It was optimism and pessimism. It was communication styles. It was vision for the future. And in a nutshell, my experience of that journey was profoundly transformative, where I came away a different human being with a whole new paradigm of what it meant to be in this world. And I also got in touch with an experience where I was like, what you guys have facilitated for me, I want to do that. And I want to do that professionally. I want to do that bigger and better. So now, so many years down the track, I reflect back on that time and look at it and go, wow, what a privilege it was to be able to be so in touch with a strong sense of purpose and mission and vision at such a young age. And so then if we look at that point in time, I then basically just started saying yes to any opportunity to be facilitating, creating workshops, leading workshops, speaking, and then working in one-on-one mentoring capacities. So in the early days, it was doing a lot of volunteering with YMCA Victoria on their school holiday youth leadership programs. Then I began to get invited to work with student leaders in schools because of my background as a student leader. And then at 22, I founded my first leadership development organization called Game Changers. And so that was really looking at how sport could be an agent for social change across grassroots Australia. And that looked like residential leadership programs for the captains of grassroots sporting clubs. That then evolved into a second initiative called the Man Cave, where me and my best friend Hunter, we would go into schools and work with year 7 to year 12 boys around challenging, deconstructing and redefining modern conceptions of masculinity and looking at what does it mean to be a man in today's day and age. So throughout my 20s, I was getting lots of experience, in-person experience, working with teenagers in understanding emotional resilience and understanding emotional intelligence, gender equality, vision, taking care of our mental health, and a lot of these really important conversations in the schoolyard and also in sporting clubs. And then as I was getting all of this experience, when I hit my mid-20s, I got to a place where externally my life looked really well put together. You know, I was speaking regularly. I was receiving public recognition awards in magazines and lots of social validation, and often, acknowledged by the parents of the students that I was working with for the great impact that I was having on their child's lives. And the reality was I looked really pretty from the outside, but on the inside, I was really struggling. I was overworking. I wasn't taking care of myself physically or nutritionally. And really, I was just having this general sense of I'm not living into my fullest potential and I'm not living life the way that I really want to do it. And so very distinctly, it was on the 19th of July, 2016, when I had a breakdown, had my hands, bawling my eyes out and feeling pretty sorry for myself. And after about 2 hours of really letting it all go, I had a simple but profound epiphany, which was a deep acknowledgement that all of my suffering and everything that I was dealing with was my own creation. And so then I'm like, okay, I created all of this. I can create my way out of it. So then I thought, okay, well, if I just put aside like all of my responsibilities and obligations, and if I could just wave the magic wand and create like how I would love for my life to be, what would I actually be doing? And then within 5 minutes, it hit me. I was like, I'd be running marathons, climbing mountains, traveling the world, transforming my life and working out some way to help other people do the same. And so I then downloaded for 3 hours this vision that I called Mountains and Marathons. The next day I woke up, I phoned my mum and dad, my business partners, my best friends and said, hey guys, I'm done. And in 2 years, I'm going to be handing over the reins of my current commitments and I'm going to be stepping into this vision called Mountains and Marathons. Now, I won't say the rest is history, but what transpired there was a series of synchronistic events that then enabled the becoming of what is Mountains and Marathons. We started back in 2018. And so we've nearly been alive for 5 years now. And we've got plenty of stories to share inside of that. But that kind of gives you a bit of a sense of my personal journey of leadership. And then ultimately what was the catalyst for the creation of what I do now, which is leading Mountains and Marathons and the Aligned Leadership Program.
Wonderful, Jamin. And thank you for that rich explanation of that background. And for those that don't know, and for people that are watching little snippets of this on video, you'll actually see that Jamin is actually in Guatemala right now. And he described to me before we came on air that he's living in a life now where he doesn't pretty much spend any more than about 2 months in any location. So he's decided that this is what he wants in his life. He wants this, I'm going to call it, no, you didn't use these words, by the way, Jamin, but this nomadic experience where he lives where he wants to live, but is still able to then make the impact he wants to make on other people's lives. Why Guatemala? Well, let's start with that. And then I want to unpack so many things that you said earlier, but why Guatemala?
Yeah, and describing me as a nomad, that's totally okay. I prefer the term geographic freedom, as it's not so much my commitment that I'm endlessly traveling all the time, although that's what my life has looked like for the last 5 years, but it's more so about creating my life such that I can pick and choose where I want to be and when I want to be in those places. And for me, I'm getting a massive, massive joy out of discovering the world. So yeah, right now you find me in Guatemala. I've been here for 6 weeks. This is my 4th time that I've lived in Guatemala across the course of the last 2 years. But if we expand that out over the last 5 years that I've been traveling, I've lived in 45 different countries. And as you just described, yeah, typically I'll spend anywhere between 6 weeks to 3 months in one specific location before then moving on to another country. As you can imagine though, over time, there are certain places that I'm always feeling into around what's the energy of this place and does it enable me to be at my best? And there's just a couple of pockets around the world where I've dropped in. I'm like, oh, something about this feels like home. And so now that my appetite for discovering new places has slowed, I like to circle back and go to places that I've discovered feel like home for me, enable me to be at my best.
Yeah, all right, brilliant. So I want to unpack at least 3 things that you said as you were doing that introduction and then eventually lead towards what you do for your clients today. The stuff that you said about the man cave, about helping young adolescent men address the perception of what masculinity means. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, nice. So if we look at the way in which boys are brought up and we look at the layers of both parenting influence and societal influence on what shapes young men's ideas of what it is to be a man, often it revolves around themes of being the lone wolf. It looks like being good at sport. It looks like being intelligent, but not too intelligent because you don't want to be the nerd. It looks like doing it alone and navigating life's challenges without sharing openly about what we're dealing with. And a lot of these kind of themes that result in, if we want to look at it, 1 in 5 boys and young men struggle with depression and anxiety across most Western countries. And so there's a lot of narratives and a lack of education and systemic structures that lead boys to be in not the most empowered place. And so when we created the Man Cave, it was an acknowledgement of these stats and also having lived my own equivalent of that as a teenager growing up and witnessing a lot of my friends struggle silently, which I didn't find out till years later, that we knew that it was important for us to be able to contribute to a movement of boys and young men becoming much more emotionally literate, much more emotionally regulated, more in touch with what it means to have courage and vulnerability, and being able to create safe spaces for boys to be able to speak specifically about what they're dealing with. And as we spent more and more time in schoolyards, we're able to refine the ways in which we're able to deliver this kind of work to support boys to being able to ultimately choose more of how they want to express themselves in their masculinity, and not just simply go down the narrative that had been painted for them by societally or perhaps the men who were their primary caregivers growing up.
Well, thank you for bringing that to light. I want to share something with you. I was recently interviewed where I was asked the question about, is it easier in a modern world to be a man or a woman? And I did say a man. I do believe that we still, unfortunately, live in a man's world where men have more privilege, more opportunities, more advantage. However, there's a lot of men out there that are really struggling. And like you just said, they're struggling in silence because they don't necessarily have the ability to express themselves emotionally, to be able to tell their mates that they're not coping or they're lost or they're having a bad time. And part of that is the societal expectation. So the role models that we've had of masculinity for many decades have not been ones that openly communicate about these things. So we're living in a world that, and you can call it woke culture, whatever you want to call it, we're living in a world that is starting to wake up to inequalities, and the world is progressing, but our role models of what it means to be a man are still there. So I'm going to say it's very difficult to be a man right now, even though it's probably still a damn lot easier than it is to be a woman in an equal world. But it's difficult to be a man these days because we're not really sure. We want to support equality. We want to do all of these things, but then the role models that we see on television and our predecessors, etc., are not that. How do you get someone to shift that perception, Jamin?
Yeah, nice. It's a big, beautiful question. So I'm going to unpack that in a couple of different layers. So to begin with, regardless, like there are different layers of privilege that people hold. And so if we look at the nature of being white and being male, that absolutely has certain privileges. And then there's being white and being female. And then there's being black and male and black and female. You know, there's all these different layers of privilege or disability or indigenous. Like you've got all these different layers of privilege, and there's almost like a hierarchy within that. Now, the first and foremost thing is to be present to our privilege, because something that I've seen as we're witnessing and being a part of this evolving society and more progressive society, more liberated society, is noticing how men can be confused about how to lead and how to be a man for the fear of being projected against purely because of being a man and or being white. And so first and foremost, it is important for us to acknowledge that as white men, we are inherently born into a layer of privilege. Now, that does not mean that we stop and that we just get out of the way. What that means is our privilege gets to exist as an opportunity. Like as a result of our privilege, we have opportunity. And then it's up to us to take hold of that opportunity to then be creating the kind of world that we actually want to live in. And so part of this, if what we believe in is a world of greater equality inside our privileged position, sometimes that may mean relinquishing a little bit of power in order to serve the collective to rise into greater levels of equality. Now, when I say power, I'm not talking about relinquishing one's own personal power. I'm just talking about relinquishing our hold on having certain titles in the workplace. Talking about relinquishing like the amount of money that we may need to hold and control within the family household. Like it's more so looking at more of these material things that we may need to look at relinquishing, whilst we can concentrate on cultivating our own inner sense of self, our own inner sense of personal power. Now, if we want to look at the layers of what actually support men to step into deep levels of personal power, well, first and foremost, it's about getting clear on and being really willing to look at who am I and who do I want to be in the world and what difference do I want to create. And I call that clarity, which is starting with clarity. And then from this place, it's about then stepping into taking complete and 100% ownership of everything that I experience in my life. Everything from the job that I have, from the quality of the connection that I have with my relationship, for the relationship that I have with my kids, the amount of money that I have in my bank account, the relationship that I have with mum and dad, my fitness, my health, the quality of the house that I live in. It's about taking 100% ownership of the quality of my life. From this place, once we're in touch with the possibility, clarity of what we want to live into, and we're getting real with what's so and owning that everything that I'm experiencing right now is my own creation, well, now we're able to actually do some work in stepping into greater levels of personal power, because what we now want to look at is how do we clear what's in the way of stepping into this possibility, into this vision of clarity, and then be actively creating and moving towards this vision. So this is where I I talk about the theme of coming into one's own deep alignment, or in other words, supporting men to come into their own deeper levels of personal integrity, it starts with clarity, then we clear, and then we create, which are the three principles or the three stages that we apply inside Mountains and Marathons of living our most deeply aligned life.
So I'm hearing three really powerful things there, Jamin, if I can play it back to you, my takeaways from what you just said. The first one, for those that are out there that are living in privilege, whether you know it or not, you're living in privilege and you're seeing an unjust world and you want to do better. What I'm hearing from Jamin is to be aware of that privilege and then let that privilege empower the change that you want to make. The second one was then about clarity of identity, but you take that clarity of identity. Don't let society dictate who you are and who you should be. You decide who you are, who you want to be, and how you're going to get there. And then the third thing is that taking that extreme ownership of I'm in charge of me, not listening to peers around me or what I see on movies or television. I decide the actions that I'm going to take. How does that sit with you?
Beautifully distilled, Mick. And, to build upon that, it's kind of like, and if we just want to unpack privilege just for a layer more there, like I won't deny it. For me, growing up, middle class, white male, like there is a certain springboard that I get to jump off as a result of having been born into this versus if I was, a Muslim woman born in the middle of Tanzania, there's like her springboard is significantly smaller than mine. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that she can't become an absolute like world-class champion in whatever her chosen field is. It doesn't mean that, but it certainly means that I've got a bit of a leg up to step into my possibility and the opportunity that exists for me in the world. The question is, however, is like, do I take that opportunity? Because there are plenty of other people in my circumstance and who lead lives that they're discontent with. But ultimately, it's the choices that we make inside of the opportunities that we're given that shape who we become and ultimately what we make of this finite time that we have in life. And if you look at the nature of the becoming of Mountains and Marathons, I was miserable. Like I'd taken the privilege of actually building a couple of businesses and then and taken advantage of the opportunity that came with that. And I'd created a life that had me be miserable. And so inside of that, I can take equal amount of responsibility for going, well, I'm miserable. So I'm now going to take 100% responsibility for creating something meaningful and something that I'm really inspired to live into.
You're probably not surprised to hear, Jamin, you're not the first person that's been on our show to share a story similar to this. And that is a story where someone would, by all society measures, would be considered to be outwardly successful. They've done what society expected of them, only to wake up one day and realize that the life that they're living was actually incongruent with themselves. And that's where the misery comes in. That's where what am I doing? The question's hanging over your head. The second thing I'm going to say there, I think is important, is then about that springboard and about taking action. The one bit of advice, and I'd love your view on this, the one bit of advice out there for people that want to be allies around addressing change in the world, the best thing you can do is listen first, right? So don't just act and do what you think needs to be done to be an ally for underprivileged groups or groups that are struggling. The first thing you can do is actually listen and ask them how you can best support them. How does that sit with you, Jamie?
Yeah, well, I think listening is one of the most powerful and underdeveloped skills in our society. And I think when I hear you speak into that, I look at it from two different layers. One is the layer of like listening fully to the needs of a community and ensuring that we're not projecting our own ideas of what the solution is onto the challenges of that community, but we're actually getting in and getting curious to discern and support a community to come up with their own solutions for social challenges, because they often will have a better insight into what needs to be done more so than, outside perspective. So that's one part, is like being willing to listen to the collective and ensure that we're hearing the perspectives of a multitude of people. The second thing is the capacity to listen within. And this is where I think a lot of people end up leading deeply misaligned lives, because throughout their life, they're constantly receiving these whispers of, hey, this job actually isn't the most aligned thing for you. But the pressure or, the societal narrative or like the ego's idea of a promotion or more money, it's like, no, I'm going to go and do that. It's the mind making the decisions, it's the ego making the decisions, whereas these little whispers of the heart that say, no, you shouldn't do that. Your path is over here. Your path is building this business. Your path is going with that woman. And then, can be marrying the wrong woman. That can also be a thing too. And then having this inner knowingness of like, whoa, I'm not with the right person, but then feeling trapped inside this context of what marriage is. So there's all these ways in which like being able to cultivate a listening and a willingness to listen deeply of self. Because I believe when often I ask people, I'll ask them, what do you really want? Like if if you could wave the magic wand, how would you create your life to be? Often people say, I don't know. And to that, I'll often call bullshit. You actually do know. You're just a bit scared to have a look. You're a bit scared to actually name the things that you ultimately desire in life, how you would ultimately love your life to be. And I can totally get why that would be the case. I mean, it might, like declaring that, I might get judgment from other people. Fears of failure might come up. Fears of success might come up. Questions of how the hell is that ever going to happen might get in the way. So it becomes a logistic challenge. So I don't even name the thing in the first place, which is where I say, if we're able to cultivate our capacity to listen deeply to ourselves and discern our own inner truth and name that and declare that, that's half the battle often. Because from my perspective, once we know where we're going, well, then we just need to continue to listen to work out the pathway there. Whereas most people don't even allow themselves to name, this is where I really want to be, where I really want to go, and instead simply follow the default path that's been put before them until they wake up in their mid-40s or mid-50s, be like, actually, you know what? This isn't how I really want to live my life.
Have you been reading my life story or something, Jamin? Yeah. This is a very common story, right? I would like to bring it to a practical tip for people if we can. So if there are people out there that have had that inner voice and they might be going, I don't really know what I want, but what I'm hearing from you is there is something inside them, but maybe their fear is holding them back, or their limiting beliefs are holding them back from even voicing it because they're concerned. Like if they've always wanted to be an artist, but societal expectation was, no, you're going to be an engineer and you're going to raise a family and you're going to do this. But that inner artist has always been there and they've been too scared to tell anyone. How does someone get started?
Yeah, perfect. Beautiful question, Mick. From my perspective, it's always about getting in touch with those who have been before you. So whether that's listening, whether that's reading the book, or whether that's listening to the podcast, or whether that's actively getting mentoring from that individual, because often like those who have come before us have navigated the same terrain that you've got to navigate. And so there's wisdom in the journey, and there's also a permission field that comes from being in and around the influence of those who have done it before. Because often it's the nature of the community, it's the energy of the communities and the kinds of people that we surround ourselves with that are either repressing bigness or encouraging bigness. And depending on that energy will shape how much we actually step into what we really want to do. And so I'm a big believer in creating safe spaces and permission fields for people to be allowed to dream, for people to be allowed to declare, this is actually what I want and how I really want to live. So from my standpoint, it's being responsible for getting in connection with people who give permission for people to explore how they really want to be in the world.
I like this concept, safe spaces and permission fields. Thanks for sharing that with us. I will add something and I'd love you to comment on this. The other thing with all kinds of courageous conversations, whether it's a challenging conversation with your spouse or a team member, or in this case, being very open about who you really are and who you really want to be, my experience is as much as you might fear that conversation, it very rarely goes as badly as you think it's going to go. And people are usually pretty receptive, particularly if they love you. They're pretty receptive and they want to support you. And the third thing I'd say to that would be those that don't, the very small percentage that might try to shoot you down because of your dream, that actually speaks more about them than it does about you. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like the heart of being powerful in communication and being responsible for creating the kind of life and relationships that we really want to live, is about being willing to lean into these challenging and confronting conversations, acknowledging that our brain is always going to be painting worst case scenario. And so hence why all the fear of the worst case scenario unfolding kind of gets in the way. And then if we have more of a flight or freeze response to stressful circumstances, we're going to withdraw and stay away. If we have a fight response, we may step into the conversation, but not do it with much grace. So the term that I give these kinds of conversations is a clearing conversation. And there's a simple framework that I often offer our members within Mountains and Marathons to be able to step into these kinds of clearing conversations. And I could actually run through it briefly. So first of all, anytime we're sitting in a place where we have a confronting conversation to have with somebody, where, like, when I say confronting, I'm talking about that energy of like the heart beats a little bit faster, the brain starts to move a little bit quicker, breathing becomes shallower. It's like we become a little activated when we think about saying those things to that person. That's when we want to move into like the mindset of, okay, I'm about to have a clearing conversation. So first of all, we want to start with clarity. And what I mean by that is, what would success off the back of this conversation look like? Like, what am I actually shooting for as the desired outcome? And so this is a bit of preparation. The second thing is, what is my intention? How do I want to show up inside of this conversation? Okay, I want to show up inside of curiosity, inside of compassion, inside of openness, inside of assertiveness. So it's actually getting in touch touch with our way of being, the energy that we bring with this conversation. So now we're connected to success and we're connected to how we're going to show up. The next bit is then moving through this simple process of opening a conversation. First of all, acknowledging the person and thanking them for being willing to be in this conversation with you, which means that ideally you've primed the person. It's like, hey, later today, I'd love to get some time. There's just something that's been on my mind that I'd love to speak with you about. Or, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I'd love to get some time with you on the weekend to talk more about X. So there's often a bit of a precursor. So there's a lead into and a context for the other person knowing they're stepping into a clearing conversation. That's really important so that they can kind of come prepared as well. First of all, acknowledge them, thank them. Thank you for being willing to meet with me and speak about X. The second thing is provide some context. The reason why it's important for me to step in to have this conversation with you is because I've noticed some patterns over the last couple of months, is because this has been something that I've been ruminating on for a long time. And it's important that we start to open up and speak about this. Like whatever the context is that leads to the stepping into the conversation. The next part is name the thing. Just name the thing. It's like, and so what I want to speak to you about is I want to move to the Gold Coast. What I want to speak to you about is I actually want to send our kids to boarding school. What I want to speak about is I don't think we're doing good investments. Like whatever that, just name the thing. From there, then we want to be willing to either provide more insight as to why, like whatever, it might be a change in decision or it might be an apology that we're making, but we just want to give a little more layers as to like the justification for why we're talking about making this decision or why you feel as though this feedback is relevant or valid for the other person. Once we've communicated that, whatever that is, we then want to shut up and go, I'm just curious about how you're receiving this. And this is the bit where character really shines through in a clearing conversation, which is one's capacity to have said the things and then to sit back and listen. The other person may be defensive. The other person may be super receptive. The other person may be excited. Like the other person could show up in so many different ways, but it is our role, responsibility in this moment to shut up and hold a space where they can speak their truth after you've just spoken yours. From this place, after they've finished, the best question you can ask after they've finished speaking is saying, got it. Is there anything else? And then often there'll be a round two. They'll keep speaking and then you go, got it. The next bit, and this is, I might be getting a little more nuanced here, but the next piece is if just as what you've been doing with me in this conversation is you've been saying, Jamin, what I'm hearing is, and you've been and then you've pulled out the three key things. Similarly in these conversations, cool. What I'm hearing is you're feeling X. You would like X. You want this. Is that right? And then they say yes. And you go, great, got it. From this place, you're now able to navigate from an understanding of what's going on for them. They've got an understanding of what's going on for you. And from that place, you're then able to make ground from there because you're both speaking from the same page. An apology may be required, or we might be stepping into a creative conversation about how we actually now make a decision moving forwards. This is the kind of process that I'll guide people or train people in becoming very proficient at. And the key skill, though, exists in that listening piece right there when we're actually getting receptive to what the other person's saying. And even just to give you an example, to make this really clear, because I understand that this would be quite conceptual for some people. Last week, I was coaching one of my clients. He determined that he wanted to divorce his wife. And so I was supporting him to prepare to be in communication with her about that. And so first of all, I guided him through this exact same process. And you think this is one of the most challenging conversations of a man's life. And I said, listen, I'm going to guide you through this process, but what I actually want you to do, I want you to type it out word for word, actually like write this out. Context, like thanks for meeting with me. Context, name the thing, speak into the reasons why, and then listen. And from that place, then, determine where to from there. Now, what ultimately transpired off the back of that was, fortunately, he got to name a whole bunch of things that he'd been holding on to for a very long time and hadn't spoken with his wife. And then she's like, hey, we're not giving up on this thing yet. This is the first time you've brought this stuff up to me. And so all of a sudden, what created was he was like, whoa, she can actually handle this kind of conversation. He wasn't expecting her to be able to handle that. And then he's like, okay, now we can actually talk about some of the shit that's really been going on in our relationship. And maybe there's room for a transformation. So context, acknowledge the person, provide context, name the thing, justify the thing, listen, and then determine where to from that place.
Yeah, really brilliant, Jamin. So I'd love to summarise it back to you in terms of what I took away from it. So a clearing conversation, great term, love it. About before you even get into the conversation, thinking about what success looks like and what you want to get out of it. When you think about the intentionality of how you're going to show up, that's really powerful. If you want to show up as curious, set the intention of showing up as curious. Acknowledging the other person. And I immediately thought of Sawabona, the African term of I see you and you see me. So acknowledging the other person is going to make them far more receptive to what you're about to talk about. Let them know that it's important to you. That's really critical in that process, I'm hearing as well, Jamin. And then you got to say the thing. It might be an elephant in the room that you've been thinking about for 5 years, but this might be new to them. So you need to get it on the table and name the thing, and then say why it's important to you again. So why this topic and why you're bringing it up now and why it's important to you, and then zip it, really hold space and give them the opportunity to process, give them the opportunity to respond. And then when they do respond, make sure this is not a one-sided thing. Make sure you've understood their response. So you spoke about asking them questions that might expand upon what their initial reaction, oh, what do you mean by that? Well, tell me more about that, etc. And then from there, you've got everything on the table and you can work on co-creating a solution to the problem if it's a problem, or co-creating a new future if it's about a new future, etc. And now you've got this mutual acknowledgement of each other in the conversation. How's my summary?
Beautiful, mate. Nailed it. Spot on.
So now we get to you, Jamin. So you've been through this. I can tell that you've lived this. 2018, you kindly were very open with us before that you had your own breakdown. And for the last almost 5 years, it leads you to, and I want to come back to something you said really early. It was very powerful. You had this awareness moment. And if I get the words correctly, I created the problems and the life that I'm in right now. Therefore, it's in my power to create the life I want. Tell me how you went through that process and what you've learnt about yourself between 2018 and today, sitting in front of me, sitting in Guatemala, drinking coffee. Tell me what you've learnt by making that pivot of, I created this, and that therefore I can create a new this.
Beautiful. So if we look at like the first principle, which I spoke into earlier around clarity, I was like, yes, I'm very clear. I don't love my life right now. Like when I was back in 2018, I'm like, 2016 specifically, that moment in time, I don't love my life right now. And I know that there is a possibility for living an extraordinary life out there for me. Like just being in touch with, there is like the possibility of a transformation exists. Now, and again, coming back to start with clarity, who do I want to be? How do I want to be? What do I want to create in the world? And so as I shared with you, I had this breakdown. I had this profound insight of I created this mess so I can create my way out of it. I then spent 3 hours that night downloading the vision for mountains and marathons. And so I'm then now in touch with this possibility, this future that had never existed before that moment. I've now created that almost like a document of origin, like a declaration. Now, is what I created there exactly what my life looks like right now? No, the essence is the same. And so first of all, what I've learned is the more in touch with and clarity I have on the future that I want to live into, the more I'm then able to look at, okay, is who I'm being and how I'm showing up right now, is it congruent with being the kind of man that's out to create this kind of life? And then if there's a congruency, I'm on path. If there's an incongruency, well, I need to do something about that. And so, if we're going to get specific about it, like in the early days of mountains and marathons, like we delivered our first program for like $4,000 USD. And that was like 6 months of individual coaching, group coaching, and a 6-day retreat in Patagonia where our clients ran a marathon. And then the prospect of having people invest $25,000 in this program, it existed as a possibility, that it was like, whoa, that gap is enormous. But we continued, me and Jenny, my business partner, ex-romantic partner, my business partner, we continued to show up inside of who do we need to be as coaches? Who do we need to be as leaders to be able to create a program so powerful that people are going to be willing to invest that kind of money, where they're going to be willing to invest in our leadership to guide them to their next evolution of what leadership looks like for them. And so inside that question of who do I need to become, it is endlessly opening up what is the next best step. And so for me, a big part of this has been continually being in touch with the vision, making declarations, and then lobbing goals out there and getting after it. So for instance, like with us, we'll create the next program, the Mount Kilimanjaro Aligned Leadership Program, and then we'll create that and then we'll market it. And it's just like, okay, well, we've got a commitment to pulling this off. What is it going to take for us to actually bring this to life? And then we get to play that game. And then again, this is where it's all about journey, not destination, because it's actually who we're becoming in the process. It's like whether we actually hit this vision of possibility or not, it's not the point. The point is that we're aspiring to it and that we're continually showing up congruent with that, because that's where the growth lies. Hence why we also set things up to be centered around it, climbing a mountain or running a marathon. It's like we set the goal of running the marathon. Now, as of right now, if you've never run before, you can't run a marathon right now. But if you consistently show up congruent with that of the identity of a marathon runner, by the time you get to the marathon, you're going to be ready to rock and roll. And so I believe we apply the same principle to supporting our growth and expansion in all areas of life.
So what it feels like there, Jamin, is it feels like a growth mindset, but a growth mindset around your identity. So shifting beyond I'm not a marathon runner to I am a marathon runner, a shift in identity, but a fixed mindset would say I'm not a marathon runner and I can never run a marathon. A growth mindset is I'm not a marathon runner yet, but I will be, and I'm going to create my identity around being a marathon runner. Just using that as the metaphor, but the same thing is with any part of your life. Have that clarity of identity that you want to create and then get about the journey that lives a congruent life. It's kind of what would X do in this situation? If I want to be X, what would an X do in this situation? And congruence, yeah, right, exactly. And start living it.
That's right.
Really powerful.
Simple, powerful, and like it's a muscle. If we want to transform our romantic relationship, like we want to have a look at how have I been being? Like I am the creator of my reality. How have I been being that's caused the quality of the relationship to be what it is right now? Okay, like what do I aspire? Again, vision. What do I aspire for this relationship to be? Or better still, what do we aspire for this relationship to be? How are we both responsible for the relationship being where it's currently at? And then how do we need to be? How do I need to show up that's congruent with this new possibility?
Yeah, I really like it. I want to add something and see what you think of this one as well. I think the other challenge along the way will be the self-reflection and resilience that would be needed. So let's say you set the identity of I want to be, let's use X again. So I want to be X and a person that is an X in this situation would behave in this way. And therefore that's what I'm going to do. But you're not going to get it right every day. So there's going to be days where you slip up, you do something where you regret it later and go, oh yeah, that was not me. I kind of did it. The thing that I want to say there is the next thing you do is going to be really important, because if you then just give up and go, I've blown it now, I'm not living the life and I might as well give up, well then you're not going to get anywhere. But the people that are able to reset the next morning and go, right, back on track today, they're the ones that are truly going to be successful in living the life they want to live. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about consistency over time. It's like consistency is going to win every single time. But like consistency of doing the right thing, of the thing that is in alignment. It even reminds me of my own personal fitness journey. Like, by the age of 24, I'd had 4 knee arthroscopes, removing cartilage, and 2 knee reconstructions. And before starting mountains and marathons, I'd never even ran a marathon before. And so as I stepped into preparing for my first marathon, I got a stress reaction in my tibia. And so my training loads had to go all the way down. I think my longest run in the lead up to my first marathon was about 10 kilometers. And so my first marathon was excruciating. But then I was like, okay, well, what does it look like? I'm committed to running a marathon on every continent, climbing a mountain on every continent. I can't stop. Like, I can't let this get in the way. What does rehab look like to then keep showing up inside of this possibility? Went on, got the right coach to support me with the rehab. And then within 12 months, I'd ran 4 marathons. Within 2 years, I'd ran 12. And then in the last 3 years, I ran an ultra marathon of 90 kilometers every year for the last 3 years. Ran up and down Mount Kilimanjaro in 18 hours in the Guinness Book of World Records for running an obstacle course race in the crater of Kilimanjaro. It's like all of this athletic accomplishment only existed as a possibility 5 years ago. And that because I continued to show up inside of that identity and then was resilient, kept showing up in moments when it didn't look like it was still going to happen, incredible results are possible.
Brilliant. And congratulations on your success in all of that. And I think there's lessons for all of us in that. Tell us about the client engagement. So if someone gets in contact with mountains and marathons now, what does it look like?
Yeah, nice. So first of all, the core program that we deliver is called the Aligned Leadership Program. And you've been hearing me speak about like living in alignment or living in integrity. And so that's the heart of what the Aligned Leadership Program is all about. It's about supporting people to live their most deeply fulfilling and aligned life. And so when someone gets in contact, first of all, we want to make sure that we're a mutually good fit for one another. In other words, because the Aligned Leadership Program is rigorous. A 6-month journey that integrates group coaching, individual coaching, fitness coaching, and nutrition coaching, and then graduates by running a marathon or climbing a mountain in some epic location around the world. And so when someone gets in contact, first of all, I want to make sure that A, this person is really ready to make a significant life change and make a significant commitment into their transformation. And then B, that they feel that me and Jenny and our team are the right people to be guiding them on that part in this journey. So then granted that there's an alignment there, the next piece is then getting clarity. We start with clarity. Like, let's get clarity on who are you really committed to being in the world? Like, what is it important to you? What does the most fulfilling and rich and satiating life look like for you? So we support people to get this depth of clarity. Thereafter, we then move into the stage that we call clearing. And And so clearing, this is when we do a deep dive on what is misaligned in our life. So we do a deep dive into people's belief systems. We look at childhood trauma, relationships with mum and dad. We look at emotional blocks and where we still lack emotional resilience and have, emotional vulnerabilities. And then we do a lot of work around clearing and healing the parts of ourselves that are ultimately getting in the way, or are the patterns that get in the way of us really stepping into this vision that we're inspired to create, that we start the program with. Once we move through clearing, and again, I think the important thing to communicate here too is that it's not that someone completes the clearing part of the program and their life is completely clear, but it's more so they've been now trained with the mindset, the tools and the skills of being able to consistently clear themselves when they notice other stuff show up as they continue to move throughout the program and beyond the program. Clarity, clearing, and then we move into the third part, which is creation. So creation is then really looking at, okay, what's the environmental structure that's supporting us or not supporting us to be living into the possibility that we've declared for ourselves to be? And so what we look at there is, who are the people that we're surrounding ourselves with? What are the quality of these relationships? Where might we be able to deepen community where the people who we surround ourselves listen big of us? And I shared this earlier, like the nature of being surrounded by people who listen to us as massive human beings, who listen to us as our potential, that is an energy in and of itself that supports like living into our potential. Whereas if we're surrounded by people who listen small of us, well, it kind of keeps us suppressed and repressed in our little ideas of what's possible. So who are we surrounding ourselves with? What's our morning and evening ritual look like? Like, what are the actual things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis that's congruent with this possibility that we're standing for? And then also we want to be looking at the energetics around the possibility, around this vision. When I say the energetics, when I invite someone to read out, it's called their manifesto. So if I'd invite you to write your manifesto, that's the ultimate vision of your life. I invite people to read it out. And as they're reading it out, tuning into, that feels free, like that feels congruent, that feels expansive. And it's like, cool, there's an energetic resonance there. But there might be other bits where the body feels tight, constricted. And it's like, tell me more about that resistance. What's that constriction? Yeah, I just don't think I deserve to have that house down on the Gold Coast. And it's like, okay, where's that? What's that? Tell me more about that belief. Where does that come from? And so then we'll do work around that belief. So this is what I mean by energetics. It's like, it's a sense checking for where do we hold resistance around the possibility, the vision that we ultimately want to create. Because from my perspective, we want to clear any of that resistance so that we become a clear channel for being able to manifest the life that we ultimately desire to create. Now, when I say manifest, it's not just sitting and meditating. That's being responsible for our emotional body and tuning into where do we hold resistance and where do we feel expansive. And then also marrying that with aligned action and ensuring that our entire life is synced up to be congruent pragmatically with the possibility that we're standing for.
Wow, really powerful. So hearing around the clarity, the clearing and the creation, and this manifesto, having the open conversation where you talk openly about it, and then noticing and naming emotions that raise when you're talking about it, and the ones that bring great joy will be, there's something there. And then the ones where, there's some kind of limiting belief there. And by being aware of the limiting belief, you can address it. If you're not aware of the limiting belief, you can't address it. And that's when you can start getting into that congruence of addressing the things that are holding you back and being really clear about where you're headed, and then taking extreme ownership, to use, I think it's Jocko's term, isn't it? To take extreme ownership of your life, to go and create that congruence. Wow. Really powerful stuff, Jamin. I really love this. And I've absolutely adored. I've been mesmerized amongst this whole conversation listening to you, Jamin. You're really clear in your message, and I can see the power of the framework and the methodology that you're using. And what I'm also hearing is you're living it as well as helping other human beings to find this as well. So that's just amazing.
Thank you, Mick. I really appreciate that acknowledgement. Yeah, man, I mean, if we're in the theme of leadership, like from my standpoint, it's like us choosing to live inspired and deeply aligned lives is the ultimate permission field and the ultimate teacher for others to be able to do the same. And so this is where we want, if we're going to be teaching, we got to be walking the talk. And so I appreciate that acknowledgement, mate, as I'm very passionate about embodying the message that we bring into the world.
You just made me think of another message, which is, we talk a lot about authenticity and showing up as your authentic self. And some people question, why is that so important? The funny thing about a leader that shows up as their authentic self is it gives people the empowerment and the permission to also show up as their authentic self. And it's exhausting to be anything else. It's exhausting. If you're playing a role every day of what people expect you to be, that's exhausting. Showing up as yourself every day is not exhausting, right? So, really cool. One more question about the process, and then we'll go to our rapid fire round. Do you only work with individuals, or do you ever work with, let's say, a leadership team where an entire team from one company goes through the process together?
Beautiful. Great question. So the short answer is yes, but I'll just pull that apart. We don't work with teams, or we don't have businesses fund people's participation inside the Aligned Leadership Program. And the primary reason for that is because it's not uncommon for us to be working with individuals who step into the program, and then we invite them to get in touch with what's true for them. And then they're like, you know what? I actually don't love my job. And so given that we're all about living in deep alignment, if someone else is funding your spot, we can't be like, sorry, you need to stay in your job. We're going to be like, all right, if that's your truth, how are we going to support you to make that transition? So we just can't promise business returns unless the business is willing to accept that people may choose to leave the company if they go through the program. So that's the first part, is like why we don't take teams through the Aligned Leadership Program and why we work with people at the individual level. Having said that, we do work with teams as far as bringing people into retreats and supporting and going through a similar process of like clarity, clearing, creation. What clarity do we have as a team? What's the vision for the team? Clearing. What beef do we have with one another? Let's make sure that's cleared. And now how are we setting up the pragmatic and energetic structures to support us to be fulfilling on that vision?
Yeah, brilliant, Jamin. A nice description, because there would be an inherent conflict of interest of someone being sponsored by their company and then they exit stage left at the end of the program.
That's right. And we just can't make those promises that people aren't going to want to quit.
Brilliant. All right, that takes us to our rapid fire round. So, Jamin, what's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
Well, 20-year-old Jamin, surround yourself with the people you want to be like.
Yeah, interesting. There is that saying around you become the sum of the 5 closest people to you, right? So, yeah, that's really interesting, Jamin. What's your favourite book?
Favorite book? Yeah, the book that had the biggest impact on me was, I'll name 2 actually. One was The Work by Byron Katie. She asked 4 powerful questions that facilitate major breakthroughs and transformations like that. And then the second one I read when I was 14, and that absolutely lit me up. And that was The Power of One by Bryce Courtney, a story of a young boy becoming a leader in his community and an athlete at the same time.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thank you. What's your favourite quote?
Marianne Williams, Our Deepest Fear. Do you know that one?
Oh, no, I don't. Tell us.
Okay, I'll recite it. It's a longer one, but I'll see how I go. Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were all meant to shine as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same.
Absolutely love it. That was brilliant, Jamin. Thank you for reciting that for us. Absolutely very powerful stuff, and so congruent with the conversation we've just had. So wonderful. And finally, Jamin, how do people get hold of you if they'd like to know more about mountains and marathons, or even you individually?
Yeah, nice. So, I mean, you can follow us on all the socials. So that's Mountains and Marathons on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to follow me personally, that's Jamin Heppell on Facebook and Instagram. And then if you want to find out about our upcoming program, specifically the Align Leadership Program, our next edition is the Outback Australia Marathon Align Leadership Program. If you want to check that out, just visit us at www.mountainsandmarathons.world, and you'll be able to follow the prompts from there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jamin. I've absolutely adored our conversation today. I was completely immersed. I have no idea how long we've been talking. It's just been so amazing. I know that our audience are going to love it as well. Thank you for your time today, and best of luck as you keep on living your life, your identity, and helping others to do that as well.
Beautiful. Absolute pleasure, Mick. And thank you so much for your support. And one thing I just want to say, mate, you are remarkable at listening and being able to distill the core message, the essence of what someone is saying. And I can totally understand why you would have a strong listenership, because your capacity to distill wisdom is really, really impressive. So thank you, mate. This has been an absolute joy.
Oh, thanks, Jamin. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mickspears.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.